don't close. All right, I think we're live. Welcome,
Sweet.
Zahn. Everyone,
Hello.
we have Zahn from Initia today to tell us all about the interwoven stack. There's been a huge amount of excitement around Initia, and rightfully so. They completed a successful testnet like a month ago, and mainnet is imminent. They have released a lot of new details about their stack in a blog post earlier this week. So we're going to unpack all of that. We're going to talk about all the applications. There's 15 different application-specific rollups that are building on Initia. And we're also going to talk a bit about, Celestia underneath, why they chose Celestia DA. It's going to be a really interesting stream. So Zahn, thank you so much for joining. And why don't you just give us a background of yourself and Initia at a high level?
Sure thing. So I'm Zahn. I'm one of the co-founders of Initia. My quick background is I've been deep in Ethereum and Cosmos DeFi for a very long time. Played with everything during DeFi summer, farmed every single yam and pickle, nearly almost all the Olympus DAO forks, which is a lot. And then spent a decent amount of time building within Cosmos itself at a large L1 there, building a startup in Cosmosm, and then starting off Initia with my co-founder Stan. So Initia, the brief introduction there is Initia is a network for interwoven rollups. And what that means is we're essentially holistically rebuilding how multi-chain networks should look, feel, and operate along the architecture stack, the product stack, and the economic systems that kind of bind them together through the Initia layer 1 and an interconnected system of layer 2s.
Cool. So basically you're saying that you were a massive degen back in the day and that
Still
inspired you
am.
to
Not
still
gonna
am.
lie.
And does that help kind of build the culture of Initia and the Initia ecosystem to some degree?
Yeah, for sure. I think we are. The rollups on Initia are definitely a bit more geared towards DeFi and financial products, and I think that's one of the core pillars of crypto as a whole. And just being an active user of actual chains, you make a lot of decisions on like the product side on how these things should work. And I think after spending so much time in Cosmos, we realize there's a lot that can be done better. And I think with the rise of modularity is you have this million chain idea. A lot of that UX stack also needs to be, kind of glued together in the right places. And I think Initia is just holistically doing it by building the architecture stack, but also the product suite at the same time.
Yeah, you have to start with the user experience as the goal, and then work backwards from there to the infrastructure. And I think that you guys are a very, very good example of that. And in order to know what the user experience should be and how it's impacted by the infrastructure, you have to be a power user yourself. So it sounds like the whole Initia team are power users of DeFi and crypto in general. So that's extremely
We
bullish.
do use the chain. Yes, I can confirm.
You actually use crypto. That's yeah, pretty rare these days. Anyway, so let's talk about, you guys published a blog post. So yeah, I want to start off with like just explaining what Initia is, right? You talk about being interwoven. My understanding of your definition of interwoven is that like it's this synthesis of modular and monolithic where you're going to have this L1 hub, which is the Initia chain, and then you're going to have these rollups on top of it called Initias, and they're going to be application-specific rollups. And you've built a whole stack to make it so that those things all feel like one, unified, interwoven experience to a user. And you've also made it so that it's very easy, from the developer perspective. Building a Initia is very similar to building a smart contract application. You have a lot of these tools that just come out of the box and things just work. TM. And so why don't you explain what interwoven is, and then like this whole tech stack that you guys published recently with optimistic modules and how they tie in together. You have the OP host, you have OP child, you have these OP bots. Why don't you just like break it down for us? And if helpful, I have the diagram, which I can pull up at any time.
Sweet. Yeah, essentially when we looked at revisiting this problem of like how should app-specific chains be built. You look at kind of the two existing worlds right now, which are basically Cosmos chains and rollups on Ethereum. Cosmos chains just, they are the most flexible system possible to like build something unique. And that's why so many people still use the Cosmos SDK. It is like literally the only toolkit to change the way that transactions are ordered, the way that they're processed, like everything about your chain. But it's difficult to bootstrap a chain. Right? You have to run a validator set. You have to deal with token inflation. You have to bootstrap that economic security, but then also all the integrations. And that integration piece is also definitely seen on rollups on Ethereum. I think rollups there, you basically get the same copy paste fork every single time using something like the OP stack or Arbitrum Orbit. And then every kind of RAS provider is like a vending machine. And I think the vending machine example is very good for the vending machine because they have all these different options that you can plug and play and choose from. But I think when you're trying to build a system that's very integrated and like concise, there is benefits to having things on the same stack so that you avoid things like liquidity fragmentation or where data is posted. And so rather than doing the vending machine design, Initia's stack is very opinionated. So we essentially work with what we think are the best in class external parties. So namely Layer 0 and Celestia. And then we kind of integrate everything within our rollup framework. So rollups on Initia are full-fledged Cosmos SDK based chains. So you can change the way that they, order transactions. You have in-app MEV lanes. You have the ability to change the gas fees or have multiple different types of gas tokens. We also support 3 different VMs, so EVM, MoveVM, or WASM VM. But then everything else that you would need to typically go deal with a BD team and figure out these integrations is just built into the stack, and you don't have to do anything. So you can just focus on building your actual application. And so what that means is oracles are just directly built in and atomically fetchable by every layer 2. You have fungibility across all of the rollups because of the interoperability providers we have, which are IBC and Layer 0. So you can onboard from any chain direct from day one when you launch your rollup. There are enshrined indexers. So indexing is very critical when you're building your front-end applications. You need different types of APIs to be able to pull, the NFT contract data, the transactions made by a certain account. These are typically all external things that you add into a chain, but they just come out of the box on Initia as well. And then, of course, Celestia for DA, which is just the most scalable DA service that I think exists on the market right now. And having also been a Cosmos chain, it makes posting data very easy. And since it's integrated into the stack, having basically everyone posting data in the same place makes it very handy when we have to do things like fraud-proof challenges or call in our layer 1 validator set to fetch that data and take a look at it. So the word interwoven, I think, describes a few different things to me. Firstly, it describes how the rollups on Initia are just connected to everything from day one, and that being through Layer 0, IBC, but also things like fiat on-ramps, native USDC, and CCTP access. Like these are just huge critical pieces that when you launch your chain, you're instantly connected to. And then it also describes to me the way that the ecosystem on Initia and the chains that use the interwoven stack work together to basically build up and grow the pie, right? I often think of rollups elsewhere as like these sovereign states that are kind of fighting alone and for themselves, but it's really difficult to win when you're trying to, reach attention just by yourself as a sovereign chain. And I think having such a tight knit community of chains building on the interwoven stack and having so many integrations between them just allows teams to work together and win together.
I love that. So one of the things I heard you say, which is a really important point, and this is often something that critics of the modular stack talk about, is we've now made it possible to spin up a rollup very easily. To actually build a new blockchain with the click of a button, or just a couple hours of work or whatever. But then the problem is that once you have your blockchain or your rollup live, you don't have all these other auxiliary features that you need to make it actually work and functional for the end application you're building, to make it easy for users to onboard, et cetera. And so there's things like you mentioned, like, well, if I'm doing DeFi or whatever, I'm going to need an Oracle. And it used to be that, I have to go talk to an Oracle provider and like negotiate with them and probably pay a ton of money to have them integrate with me. But with Initia, we have that out of the stack. I'm assuming with Skip, correct? We have things like indexers as well, where it used to be, okay, I need to talk to, get a block explorer, get an indexer, had to pay for that again out of pocket, sometimes a lot of money. A lot of these providers are pretty extractive, by the way. And with Initia, like all of these things, and like USDC, it used to cost a ton of money and take literally years, actually, way back in the day.
It's basically impossible to get native USDC on a rollup unless you're like massive, right? Unless you're the scale of something like Arbitrum or Optimism, you're not going to have native CCTP access.
Exactly. Shout out to Noble, by the way.
Thank you, Noble.
and so people probably wouldn't believe this, but like back in the day, each one of these things, like, and getting an Oracle, let's say it's Chainlink, getting a block explorer / indexer, let's say it was Etherscan, or getting USDC or USDT support, literally used to be like a year-long BD process and like over $1 million each. Right. So like a lot of people were saying, the real cost of building the modular stack is not that like, oh, it's so hard to build your own chain and get a validator set, whatever, but it's these other things. And there was some truth to that. But then teams like Initia have been working on solving that other aspect of modularity. And not, again, bridging and fragmentation is another huge part of this. So, when there's not like a clarity around a specific bridging standard or hub, you have fragmentation. Even if, you're going to have all these different bridging providers. It sounds like you guys have also kind of like made it so that the developer doesn't have to think about that or worry about that. It's just like plug and play from the beginning. So I could not be more in agreement with like, you guys have solved the right problems to make this vision actually possible.
Yeah, I think just having opinions on how these systems should work lets you just focus on like the real problems, right? If we obviously can't please everyone, and I think there are potential use cases of like why you would use a different DA provider or a different interoperability solution, but to a large degree, I think just working with the best in class teams and integrating it into the system so that no one has to make these choices or deal with choosing between multiple and doing a whole process for that is much more effective, because often teams that want to build app chains are doing so because they want to control their economic stack, they want to control their sovereignty, they want to make sure they retain value, but they do not really care about dealing with any of those third-party service providers. They just want to build a kick-ass app. And I think the interwoven stack is the best place to do that, especially because not only do we solve the architecture problem there, but we also have a full product suite. So what does it actually look like for end users when they come in and use the applications here? What does it feel like to bridge in from, say, Arbitrum to a rollup on the interwoven stack? What does it feel like to connect to wallets? How can we lower as many barriers to entry for users across multiple different ecosystems to come use these chains and make it as seamless as possible to move around them? There's a lot of talk about this chain abstracted future, and I'm definitely bought into the belief that there will be like thousands of app chains, of course. And so making it as simple as possible for end users to interact with them and go between them and cross-pollinate is how we can build like a strong, tight-knit, thriving modular expansion.
Modular expansion. Well, the other thing is that, we just talked a lot about the infrastructure and the developer experience, and clearly, there are 15 different teams, many of which are venture-backed, building on the Initia stack. I assume are also going to launch as you guys launch mainnet, which is extremely exciting. And I keep hearing the feedback that the user experience of using Initia and these minutiae is like just tells it all, in the sense of like it's working. So let's talk a little bit more about the applications themselves. And I was looking down at your guys' sort of like ecosystem map, and there's some really cool ones. Obviously, you're wearing a Milky Way shirt. We're very familiar with Milky Way. It's like a liquid staking protocol. Really strong team. There's Blackwing, who I also listened to them on the expansion podcast. They're building margin trading without liquidations. We have Czar, which is like the fun chain and like has NFTs and stuff like that. And then I also saw Inertia, which is lending. So anyway, you have this like really big ecosystem, but I want to give you an opportunity to like talk about, any individual teams. I know it's hard to like, pick favorites or, spotlight all of them, but are there any that stand out to you that are interesting, that would be interesting to the audience? And then also like, how do you see the ecosystem of Initia as a whole, essentially, and how they all these different things plug in together, right? Because they're not just isolated applications; they're part of a cohesive, interwoven ecosystem.
Right. So I think one of the things that we really want to address when trying to kickstart some of the teams on the interwoven stack was, if you look at the way successful ecosystems have formed, it's always because there's a couple of killer apps that are doing something interesting that have reasons to bring new users to interact with them, right? Like if you look at Arbitrum, it was basically GMX, and everything was built around GLP. If you look at Optimism, it was like things like Synthetics and Velodrome. Now you have stuff like Hyperliquid, which is really taking off. I think one of the things that is often done wrong is new ecosystems launch their chain, and then you get the exact same, copy paste forks of your lending, your DEX, your UniV2 forks, maybe a GMX fork. And I don't think that's going to move the needle long term for being a compelling reason for new users to actually come and engage with this system, unless you're just paying out a lot of incentives. And one of the things that's great about modularity and rollups, and especially application-specific rollups, is the reason you're ideally doing this is because you want to customize something to build something unique. Right? That's where you can actually create powerful applications because you have full control over how everything works. And so there are a handful of teams on the interwoven stack that I think are building really unique products that have real product offerings that are compelling to new users and are going to be just bangers when they launch. And so some of those are like Blackwing, like you mentioned. So Blackwing basically uses, or what they are is limitless. Basically, they use this design called limitless pools, which allows you to take leverage trades on any asset without liquidation and without oracle risk. And they specifically use their chain on the interwoven stack as like an intent solver hub. And so the reason they do that is because they want this limitless pools design to be across literally every chain. So if there is a token on Pump Fund that makes it onto Radium, you can now perform leverage on that. If there is something that is on Thrust or on Blast, you can perform leverage on that. If there's something on Osmosis, you can do the same. And the way that they create that chain abstracted and DEX abstracted experience is by having trades done on each individual chain. But as a user, you just come to Blackwing itself, you make the trade, and then the intent solver system basically goes out to the destination chain and makes the trade that you need to create that leveraged position. And so they've really just customized this chain specific for what they need to create this amazing experience where you can trade leverage on any token on any chain. So I think that's a very good example of someone doing something unique with the stack. Another one is Milky Way, right? Because I'm obviously wearing their shirt, so I have to shill them. Milky Way is the largest and the first LST for Celestia, but they're now moving towards a restaking angle. And I think restaking makes a lot of sense within the modular landscape, right? Because in modular land, we have like the most amount of little pieces of things like connecting to each other, things like IBC relays, these roll-up nodes, any little part of the modular system could typically use some additional security. And so Milky Way is building a restaking hub on the interwoven stack, which allows you to restake things like TIA, Init, and potentially other assets, and then use that security to bootstrap it for pieces in modular land. Another one that I think is very interesting is called Contro. So Contro built this mechanism called the glob. Really good word. I think I'm most bullish on Contro just because of the word glob. But it stands for the Gradual Limit Order Book. And what it does is it basically slows down the time of markets. And it's specifically built for stuff like prediction markets, which is very timely right now. But the founder, Andreas, built this like 2 years ago. He came up with an initial design. And now it's all kind of coming together. But what it does is if you look at traditional prediction markets, time is often something that people compete on, right? Like if I find out information sooner than someone else, or if I am doing some insider trading and I know some intel, I can basically snipe all the remaining upside of a given pool or a given prediction. But the glob removes that time element. And so what it does is even if you're learning this information 30 minutes before someone else or an hour later, you can still make your prediction and still capture some of the upside. So it isn't actually a fair prediction market that no other prediction market can do because they built this glob mechanism directly into their rollup. And it can power all sorts of additional things in the future outside of predictions, stuff like trading and perpetuals as well. A few other interesting ones. So there's this project called Infinity Ground. They're building on the interwoven stack. They are building basically AI entertainment. And so what that means is they've developed a bunch of really cool AI models that let them create games, videos, memes, all that sort of stuff extremely quickly. And so they can essentially pump out like new video games for people to play like every 3 days using this AI model that they have. And some of the games are really fun and they're working with an incredible design studio. The founder used to work for MyShell, so she has a bunch of experience here. And basically, one of the games I played was basically Dance Dance Revolution, but you're tapping and you're Trump dodging bullets. This other one that they're making is specifically for Initia, which is like a jumping game that will come out in the next few days, but they can crank out these games in like 3 days and they're incredibly good. Like they have a lot of quality. I think it's going to be basically like mini clip, but has a chain. And I think it's going to be phenomenal. Are there any that specifically caught your eye that you want to dive deeper into?
No, I think that was a great overview, and I mean there's 15, so it would be take too long to go through each one of them. But we got a good cross section, right? We have restaking and LSTs, we have various DeFi mechanisms, we have games, we have NFTs. It's clear to me that you guys have a really robust and diverse ecosystem that kind of hits a lot of the main categories. I even saw one actually that was had some kind of AI angle as well. That was like I think you use AI to generate NFTs or something like that. I thought that was kind of cool. So
Init
anyway,
AI. Yes.
sorry,
It was called Init AI,
Init
which is
AI.
funny. You're just Initia, but you swap the last two letters.
Yeah, it's
But
like
that
you
was
guys are
just
planning for
looking.
that all along. The pivot to AI.
Yup.
Well, anyway, the other cool thing is that each one of these, so the Initia L1 is its own L1, right? I don't think it's not actually tied into Celestia for DA, but each one of these rollups or application specific rollups, applications building on Initia, the Initias, all post their data and become essentially to some degree Celestia rollups while settling to Initia. So that's really exciting because there are currently 20 rollups live on Celestia, a lot more in the pipeline. But as soon as Initia launches, I guess there's going to
Boom.
be a bunch
10
more
more. At least,
overnight.
hopefully there'll be around 10 for day one.
Yeah.
That's our goal to make sure that everything's lined up. We're going to be doing a large um, orchestration soon where we practice doing a mainnet launch with all of the teams on the interwoven stack. And it's just a big coordination effort. I think adding each one later on is very easy to spin up a new one, but doing it all at the same time is a hard task. So we're going to practice it so that we can get it right when mainnet comes along. But yes, every rollup on Initia just by default post data to Celestia. And I think it's incredibly valuable to have all the data in the same place for a few different reasons. One is we have this system called Omnitia Shared Security. And basically, when a fraud proof challenge comes in on one of these rollups, if someone is acting maliciously, we use our layer one validator set as a way to basically solve these fraud proof challenges. So, typically in a fraud proof challenge is something like a rollback, but you also typically need to replace either who the operator is or who the challenger is if one of those two are lying. And so the way that we decide that is having our layer one validator set come to consensus on which one of those should be replaced, and being able to just look up a NMT on Celestia and knowing that all the data will be there because of the chain ID that we're looking at makes it really easy. Like, these validators don't need to look at 5 different DA layers to figure it out. It's all just in one place and very easily accessible because of NMTs. And then we also have this really cool feature called state sync rollbacks. And this is basically when we need to do a rollback of a chain, we can basically just fork the rollup, fetch all the data from Celestia, and then create a new instance of it from before the fraud proof challenge. And that makes things really easy for us, right? Like, Celestia was kind of designed for this, and taking advantage of this modular idea where certain teams are optimizing different parts of the stack so that we don't need to build it makes it a lot easier on our end.
Yeah, and my understanding is that these minitias are optimistic rollups, and so in order for the challenger to also be able to challenge, a fraudulent like state update or whatever, they need to be sure that the data is available on Celestia so that the watcher, the challenger, actually can get the information it needs to generate the fraud proof. And anyway, that mainnet launch, if you're like launching mainnet on its own is hard enough, but if you have to coordinate with 10 or more rollups at the same time, I can just imagine. So glad that you guys are practicing and very excited to see it go live. It's a very, very ambitious launch. In fact, I mean, one of the most ambitious launches I can think of. So we only have a few more minutes left. So let's just talk quickly about this VIP program you guys have published a while back, which is like vested interest program. It's basically, as I understand, sort of like the incentive mechanism that like kickstarts the whole like on-chain economy of Initia and also ties the whole ecosystem together economically. And I feel like, I mean, one of the themes of that blog post was, taking learnings from the Ethereum ecosystem and how things have played out there, and also from the Cosmos ecosystem and how things have played out there. So maybe just give people a quick like background of that.
Yep. So hindsight really is 2020. And we're kind of thankful for that, because we got to see how these systems evolved, right? I think basically in Cosmos land, Atom doesn't really have a strong use case. And that's because it never really tried to. Like, no one really uses ICS. There hasn't been a new consumer chain for quite a while. The Atom token is not a token that anyone cares about integrating on their chain. And it's not being used to help attract new users for any of the consumer chains. Rollups on Ethereum, I think Ethereum is just very lindy. And so ETH is canonically the asset that's used across every rollup. Maybe that's originally because you could only use ETH as gas, but also it is just a massive asset and everybody basically holds it. So it's just canonically the largest item on every DEX, on every lending market. It is the gas token. But on Initia, we want teams to be able to customize what they care about, right? Maybe they're using a different token for gas. We don't want to force them into anything. And so we wanted to ensure that the native token in it has a strong use case within the world that we're building. And I think teams often focus on the supply side of things. How can we burn tokens to reduce the supply? But I think in 99% of cases, you will not be able to burn enough tokens to create substantial demand effects, but you might be able to create like some narrative. So rather, in Initia, we focus on the demand side of things. How can we create more use cases for the native token? And how can we incentivize that programmatically while helping teams on the interwoven stack win, attract more users, and keep them there over time? And so we basically created this system called Initia VIP, which kind of structurally changes the way that interwoven rollups expand and gives them a reason to have stake in the underlying ecosystem and Initia at large. What it does is basically we have 10% of the token supply. It is distributed to layer twos based on the amount of init tokens they have on the layer two, as well as a gauge vote on the layer one. And then each layer two can decide how they want to distribute it to their users. So they can make their own point system, essentially, where they say, okay, I actually care about incentivizing volume on my chain, or I care about incentivizing borrows, or the mints of these NFTs, whatever is actually most valuable for them. And then Initia, the system, distributes rewards directly to those users based on the KPI you set. So it is a very flexible design that leaves the design choices up to the layer two operator to figure out what they want to incentivize. And then these rewards are distributed as escrowed init tokens. And the way that they're unlocked is by users continuing their engagement. So if I earned a bunch of escrowed init by trading volume on Blackwing, I have to maintain my volume on Blackwing over time to unlock these rewards. But as I maintain my volume, I'm going to earn more locked rewards. And you have this kind of a flywheel effect where you have created a new use case for the init token, ideally on that chain. You have given the layer two team additional means to attract new users. And then you've given users a very strong reason to keep coming back over time and engaging with the layer two again and again and again. And I think ultimately this system exists to help layer twos on Initia win, but also make init token like the canonical money of our interwoven system.
I love it. I mean, it's a critical part, and this to me ties together the whole vision of Initia, right? It's the interwoven infrastructure which tackles all these developer experience problems and user experience problems, and then it's this whole ecosystem of applications, and then last but not least is this economic aspect, which is also equally important that you guys have thought about. So really impressed with the entire vision and just execution of Initia as a project. Last but not least, I want to just ask you, like, what does build whatever with Celestia underneath mean to you? It's a phrase that we say a lot in the Celestia ecosystem, but I'm curious, how does that resonate with you? What does it mean from where you sit?
Yeah, I remember being at Modular Summit in Brussels, and I forget who was on the panel, but he was basically saying that the tagline should be "build fucking something." But I think "build whatever" also kind of means that, and I think it's just talking about how, as the future evolves and as we go down this path of application-specific chains, we're going to have new design choices and new primitives and new things built that are only unlocked because you have these application specific chains where you can actually customize something to your use case. And I think Celestia being a big proponent of that and being so supportive of Initia and the teams on the interwoven stack has really meant a lot, right? Like teams can come in and build anything that they want to build that can attract users and hopefully be a fun product. Um, yeah.
Love that. And also the whole stack that you've built, I mean, if it's successful, can attract an extreme amount of activity as well as new developers and new applications. And it's going to need a very secure, scalable data availability system kind of underpinning it. And I think that like hopefully we can rise to the occasion when as your ecosystem grows, our block space grows in stride to keep this whole system working. Well, this has been a great conversation, and we have a good grasp of like where you guys have gotten to so far. You guys just wrapped up testnet, mainnet is imminent, but what can people expect for the roadmap ahead for Initia, and where can they follow or get involved if they're interested?
So You can follow us at Initia FDN on Twitter. And you can visit initia.xyz. Testnet is still live. It is no longer incentivized, but you can definitely play around with it and try out some of the applications. There might be some jankiness as we, do this whole orchestration practice relaunch. There's 4 new chains on the interwoven stack that are to be announced, which will be releasing ideally over the next month or so. So keep an eye out on Twitter for those. And then ideally we will have mainnet coming up within the next 2 months. So stay peeled, get ready to become interwoven. And I'm very glad to have Celestia underneath all of this.
Awesome. Thank you, Zan. So stay interwoven, but be patient because what's the meme? It's like, be patient, I'm interwoven.
Yeah, please be patient. I'm interwoven.
Yeah. Mainnet is coming, but be patient. Anyways, Zan, this has been awesome having you on. I really appreciate it. And, all the best to all the Initia builders out there and to the broader modular ecosystem. Cheers, everybody.